Good afternoon and welcome back to the boat. It has been a few weeks since I've filmed anything sort of medicine related or anything, so I thought it was about due. It's currently mid-November, hence the cardigan. I've had the fire on, but yeah, I've had some issues with my heating, my electric, and just generally trying to keep on top of uni work, so hence the not filming any videos, but hopefully I'll get back on top of that now. So being mid-November, we're about halfway through the second module of the course, and I thought it was a really good time to maybe do a comparison between how I found my first degree and how I'm currently finding this degree. So I thought it was quite a good point to do that. What I want to go through is I want to cover the general modules and the timetable, the teaching style, the professional development, and sort of the professional experience that you get in both degrees. So yeah, stick around and hopefully you'll enjoy. Okay, so let's jump right in and start with the modules of the course. Obviously the modules are going to be very different, and that's not really what I want to talk about. So I did aerospace engineering as my first degree. Yes, surprisingly, aerodynamics does not come up in medicine very often. It's sort of how the modules are built and how they're structured that I want to kind of focus on, because this is something I didn't appreciate or know going into GEM. With my first degree, as I think most degrees tend to run, is that the modules run concurrently. So each sort of term or semester, I'd have 2, 3, or 4 modules that were all running at the same time. We'd have lectures for them every week. Each module is its own distinct subject. So some of the modules I had for my first degree: aerodynamics, aircraft structures, we have aerospace materials, we have lots of different distinct subjects that sit apart from each other. And at the end of those terms or semesters, there'd be an exam period that would test us on the modules that we've covered, or there'd be coursework or some other sort of assessed element of the course. There was a little bit of cross-linking between the modules, so some of them do naturally feed into each other, and I think that's sort of just the nature of the course. Like, they do tend to coalesce together, and then like you start to develop a deeper understanding of it. However, coming into GEM, that is very different, and that is not at all how it works. So instead of having sort of modules that are kind of running concurrently together, they have 9 modules throughout the course, and they are broken up separately. You finish one module and then you go on to the next. Each of the modules is a sort of system of the body, or just a general system that you would look at, excluding module 1, which is a little bit of a leveling module to get everyone on the same page. I'm going to do a video and go into a little bit more detail about what module 1 was. As opposed to being sort of examined at the end of every group of modules, we have one knowledge-based exam, so one which is just a sort of classic exam, and that is at the end of Gem 1. So that is our first sort of graded knowledge bit of the course. We do have a couple of essays and some OSCEs, which are objective structured clinical examinations, which is how we get assessed on our sort of procedural and our sort of physical skills that we learn throughout the course. So we have some of them, we have some mocks, and we have the sort of the summative ones at this round about the same time that the knowledge-based exam is. So that's something I found quite difficult, is because I'm used to having separate modules kind of running at the same time. So each of the 9 modules is, as I've said, its own subject. But within there, there are sort of some themes that the lectures cover, but they aren't labelled as sort of their own distinct subjects. So it's not just like, this is virology, you're going to learn this. This is embryology, you're going to learn this. They're broad topics that are covered within the lectures, and what you tend to find is, with the way it's done, the lectures do have quite a lot of overlap, and some of the subjects will be covered a couple of times, which is really good because you kind of get different perspectives. But also, what I find makes it a little bit trickier for me is that if your head's getting a bit done in with one subject, it's really hard to then switch and go over to a different topic. So, I'll take a break from this and I'll switch over because, so like, for example, in my first degree, I'm quite sick of aerodynamics now, but I really like the material side of it. So I'm going to flick over, give my head a bit of a break and enjoy it. Because the subjects are so closely linked, I find it quite hard to be like, I'm going to take a break from this and do something very similar. So I've touched on it a little bit, but let's sort of dive into it now. So let's talk about the timetable differences between the two courses. I just want to start this with a caveat that my first degree was pre-COVID, so I graduated well before COVID had even existed. There is some elements of the course that I think have changed due to that, but they have been retained and sort of they haven't reverted back to how they were. So that is a possible explanation for why it's done this way. But as I say, I just kind of want to compare how my experience has been between the two degrees. So in my first degree, all of my lectures were delivered in person. There was no recording of lectures. They weren't uploaded. The slides were available and uploaded. Basically, if you missed the lecture, you had to sort of message your friends and see if they went or if they have any notes, because quite often the lecturers they have their slides up, but they add a lot of information that they talk about. They use sort of whiteboards at the front to talk through some of the complex stuff, and they work through examples of questions as well. So it was difficult in that sense because it meant that there was no flexibility. If you were ill or something like that, you kind of had to try and get as much information and piece it together from you friends and stuff that did go to the lecture. We also, in our timetable, we had dedicated seminars, lectures, tutorials built into our timetable, and we had a high amount of contact hours, especially compared to some other degrees that were done at the university, sort of that had a lot of self-directed study. We were very much high contact hours. We did still have self-directed study to do and a lot of work to do outside of it, but the actual physical time spent in uni was quite high. I put a little example of my timetable up, so this is kind of what it looked like about this time actually. So this is I think this is from about this week. So like the November week of my first year of my first degree. Comparing that with how things look a bit now, a lot of the course, so a lot of the knowledge and lectures that we are given are asynchronous, which just means they're pre-recorded and released weekly for us to watch and go through during our own time. This has some fantastic benefits because it means that you can sort of fit it more around your life. So a lot of people who are on the GEM course come from professional backgrounds and come from jobs that they're still able to locum or do part-time. It builds a lot of flexibility. It means we have more days off, if you want to look at it that way, although there is still a high amount of work to do, but you just kind of decide when you do that. Each of the lectures, so I think the most we've had is 10 in 1 week. They are released on a Tuesday once we've gotten our case of the week, so our PBL case. And then we have basically the week to go through them. One of the issues I'm finding is for PBL each week, everyone in the group does a presentation. I'm going to do a video on PBL as well and sort of talk through how that works. So everyone will do a presentation on a different topic that's related to the case. All of the lectures that are released are related to the case, either strongly or loosely. We either present on a Friday or we present the following Tuesday before we get our new case. Sometimes it can be quite hard because people will do quizzes on their topic and you haven't done that lecture yet. So you find, for me, it's a little bit demoralizing at times because people are putting this quiz up and some people have done the lecture and some people haven't had time or just have done other ones instead. So it's quite hard to be like, oh, I don't know anything you're talking about. And it's just because you haven't sort of gone through the lecture yet, because it's very much, it's in your own time. It's when you decide to do it. So I'll put the timetable up for GEM currently. This is how it looks. It looks fairly sparse. There is a lot of free time in there. And I actually have a few days off. Most weeks I've had at least 2 days off, and some weeks I've had 3 days off, but those days off are spent doing these lectures. So we have to go through the lectures, make our notes, make our revision material. There's a lot of work that goes into it that isn't reflected just by purely looking at the timetable. So although some people might look at the timetable and go, oh, that's really nice, you've got all this time off. And it's like, yes, I can be more flexible with my time. However, I still have a lot of work, a lot of demands that I need to meet in order to keep up with the course. So moving on from the timetable, let's have a look at the teaching style. Both of these degrees, roughly looking at them, they are application style degrees. What I mean by that is engineering for me is the application of physics. So a physics degree is going to go really hard into the theoretical principles and you're going to dive down into the minutiae of why every little thing works the way it does. Whereas engineering is a broader view, and then how do we take those principles and translate them into the real world to sort of get benefit from that. And medicine is is the application of biology and chemistry, translating that into the real world in order to help the general population and to help individual people to fight disease and sort of so on. So they're both very application-based degrees. In my first degree, the teaching style was probably what I'd call quite sequential. So you start with a very basic idea of something, and then you build on that throughout that module. And you don't really come back to the basics once you've learned it. You just keep sort of building on that. So you kind of need a strong foundation in order to then understand the complex things. An example of this is in aircraft dynamics. The lecturer might introduce the concept of drag at the very start as a basic sort of principle. What is it and how does it affect aircraft? Then we might go on to sort of explore why it affects aircraft and look at simple calculations and sort of things like that for drag. Then we go on to sort of the complex topics of how that equation is originally derived, how it feeds into other things, and how do we calculate all the different components that feed into there. So it builds on what you've known previously, and if you don't really understand the previous step, it's quite difficult to understand the more complex things. Even though the topics were quite complex and there was a lot of stuff that if you didn't understand, it was hard to follow on from that, we got lots of opportunity for practice and development. There was a lot of practice questions, mock exams, and we got a good experience of what we're going to sort of get in the exam. That was also compounded because we had a lot of tutorial sessions, which is, they're usually well placed so that if you've gone through a complex topic, you would tend to have a tutorial that week, and the lecturer would go through the question, really break it down and be able to sort of help you with specific bits you're struggling with, and you felt very supported and they helped you a lot, which was really good. The teaching style for GEM is quite different in good and bad ways. They use what is called sort of a spiral teaching style. So you might visit a complex topic quite early on, and it might seem quite confusing, quite daunting to understand everything that sort of feeds into it and trying to build all that knowledge in. But you'll find that later down the line, maybe in a different module, you'll revisit that topic and you start building the bigger picture around it, but you're also sort of, you have the chance to know and develop the original bit that you learned. So you revisit topics. You don't just sort of, it's not just there, it's done and continue. You get to go back, you get to build on them. That's really good because it means that even though you've put a lot of work in, you're still like, I'm just not quite getting it. Then later down the line, you'll be like, oh, right, we've seen this again. And oh, I'm starting to see how it feeds in with other things and starting to build the bigger picture around it. So it's sort of good that way. So I can't lie, there's a huge amount of rote learning that is involved in medicine. I think that goes for graduate entry and undergrad. It's just the nature of the beast, really. There is a lot of things that you have to learn and memorize and understand, and you just have to kind of fit all that knowledge in and use different tools and different methods of how people learn best in order to sort of retain and memorize that and then be able to regurgitate that information in an exam. What I found is, because I was quite daunted by that, my first degree, although we had to memorize a lot of equations and sort of principles, the rote learning was nowhere near the level that's sort of expected in medicine. Especially for topics like anatomy, you have to memorize, you have to know basically the human body and all the different parts of how they all link together. But the teaching staff here understand that, and they understand how daunting it can seem for students. So what I've found is there is a lot of support, there is a lot of resources that are available. We get access to different apps and different services to sort of give us a plethora of resources available to help us learn it. The staff are also really helpful. They're available and they are understanding and appreciative of how difficult it is to learn all of this. I found that really useful. The anatomy teaching staff are great, and that's really been a help, and it was a weight off my mind because, as I say, I was quite daunted by the idea of just having to memorize that much raw information coming in. The downsides of the teaching style, and this is more to do with sort of just the general asynchronous nature of the course, is I really don't feel a connection or rapport with any of the teaching staff, whereas I really did in my first degree. Some of the staff that we've had, I've never seen them in person, or I don't even know what some of them look like. They don't put their cameras on. To be honest, I prefer not having the camera on because it tends to block something they're putting on the slide, but that's a whole different thing. I find it quite difficult to build that connection. I don't know, it makes them less approachable, I think. Because I suppose what I mean is that in a lecture for me, in my sort of undergrad, if I went into a lecture, they have sort of the 5-10 minutes at the start of the lecture, The lecturer would be chatting a little bit, maybe telling you about what they're doing, especially if they're currently in industry. And it feels a little bit more personable. And then there's also time at the end where they hang around and you can go down and chat with them, maybe about the lecture or about some other things. And it's quite good. You can build up that relationship. With this sort of asynchronous nature, they very much press record on the lecture, they deliver the lecture, and they stop recording. They don't tend to add too much. They don't talk about themselves. And yeah, it's great because, it's really focused on the lecture content, but you lose that sort of personable nature with the staff. It also means that although the lecture staff are available for being able to email them and ask them questions about the lecture, you can't ask it in the moment. You can't just be like, oh, just a quick thing while you're on there, XYZ. And that for me makes it difficult because I might just think of a question in the moment, and then as they sort of like trying to pause it, and then you go and Google it and you try and sort of explore it a bit more. And if you don't understand that, then they go on to something else which relates to it, and it compounds it and makes it hard. Yes, you can email them and ask them questions. They're very good at replying in sort of a timely manner, but it's not going to be the same response as I ask a lecturer a question, they give me a response there and then. And also being able to sort of show exactly what you mean. And sometimes I find that a bit hard in email to clarify exactly what you mean. Or just them saying, oh, do you want to hang back for 5 minutes at the end and I'll go through it with you, or something like that. That's something that I'm finding a bit difficult, but I think that is just due to sort of the asynchronous nature of the course. And I think as we get into the clinical phase of the course, that should hopefully evaporate a little bit. Okay, so last two topics now. So professional development and experience. Professional development. Both of these degrees are what I would class as very professional degrees. You are going into sort of the engineering profession or the medical profession. There is an expectation of continuous development and honing your skills and keeping on top of them. So both degrees definitely have that in common. As part of that, reflection is a key theme. It's something that we've already done in GEM. We've already done our first sort of reflective essay, and it's something I did throughout my first degree, is reflecting, looking back on what you've learned and sort of trying to see how you could possibly do better or what you struggle with. It is a really great skill to have. It's not my favorite skill. I'm not the best person for writing, especially reflective essays. That's just the nature of the beast, really. Professional development is own module or topic that was covered in both of the degrees. In my first degree, it was very much its own module. We had lectures for it every week, and they would focus on sort of some of the professional development skills, and also they would help us gradually build up a portfolio that we'd be submitting at the end of the year and would be the start of our sort of professional development journey, especially for people who are sort of going down the chartership route for engineering. And touching on that, these lectures and sort of the experiences that we got from there gave a strong understanding of how continuing professional development works and what are the routes to going into chartership and how we work with other professions, other engineering professions or other periphery services. So it was a really good chance to get to become a rounded professional.
In the GEM course, this is where I can see one of the differences between the two courses sort of very much stand out. And this is due to the sort of condensed nature of the GEM course, because they're trying to squeeze so much in such a small period of time. One of the shortfalls of that is there aren't as many sort of dedicated personal professional development sessions each week. So we don't have a regular timetabled development session where we'll go through and explore certain topics or gradually build up the skills and elements of the portfolio that we need to add in. We do have some of these sessions that have been delivered but they're more around when we have to start doing an essay or when we start doing a portfolio, and it'll usually just be one lecture where they run through it and then we're kind of left to our own devices a little bit to go and do it, although there are some resources online to aid us there. However, it's not as if they've completely abandoned all of the softer skills and such like that. They are covered in the clinical skills sessions that we have each week, where we learn our examination and our procedural techniques. We also cover some of the softer skills. Some of it's around communicating with patients, but they also cover topics like burnout, recognizing that in colleagues and being able to help people, and also focusing on your own development. It's not as if it's been abandoned completely, it's just delivered in a different way, and it's not sort of a very protected, this is your PPD time, this is when you can start looking at your development and start building stuff for your portfolio. So one of the things the university has is it has its Centre for Interprofessional Education and Learning, And what they do is they run sessions to help people understand how to work professionally with the other professional healthcare professionals that you're going to be working with as part of the wider multidisciplinary team. So it's how to work together, how you fit in, and how to support and how they can support you. I know for the undergraduate course, it is a mandatory element of their course that they attend those workshops. Again, due to the condensed nature of our course, they are open to us and allow us to attend, but they are not mandatory elements just because of the time constraints on the course. It's really hard to fit that in. Okay, we've made it. We're on to the final section. I'm going to stop waffling on soon. We are going to cover the experience that is available in both courses and how it differs. Both courses do have experience, sort of like professional experience as part of them. They want to focus on how you are going to work in the professional environment when you start and when you go into practice. In my first degree, how this looked is we had laboratory practicals, we had workshops on aircraft and being able to sort of be around them and experience them a bit more. And this was given from quite early on in the course and ran throughout the whole course. One of the big things as well is we got to do a test flight experience at Cranfield, so we got to see how a lot of the things we are learning and that knowledge that we're gaining and how it applies to real life and understanding the application, which is, as I said, the degree is a very application-based degree. However, the main bulk of experience, if you wanted industry experience, comes from taking a gap year. Between your second and third year, you have the option to take a year in industry, which is where you can apply to certain companies and you get to experience what it's like to be an engineer in those companies for a year. You take that out of your course and then you do come back to your third year, and a lot of people who've done that end up with a place at the company that they did their sort of year in industry in. In GEM, the sort of focus on professional experience comes very early on. I mean, we did our first GP placement, I think it was within the first 4 or 5 weeks of the course. We were at our GP practices, which was amazing because you got to be in that environment that's not just simulated, it was the actual environment that you're going to be in when you're in practice. There are 6 GP placements, I think, that we do throughout the year, and aside from those, in the first 18 months, a lot of the rest of the experience we get is simulated experience. So we have patients that come in, we have actors that come in and simulate patients in different scenarios, and we also practice our clinical skills and on each other as well. So it's very simulated, but there are also the opportunities to put that into practice throughout the course. And then after the first 18 months of the course, it's very heavily experience based. You are on placement basically from the end of the sort of preliminary 18 months to the end of the course is all placement based. It's very experience based. That's when you're going to hone those skills and gain that experience in the field that you've chosen to do your degree in. Okay, so that is it. That is my comparison, sort of mid-November, halfway through module 2, how I found the differences between the 2 degrees and all the different areas where I think there's sort of differences and where there is some similarities as well. Neither degree is perfect, and there are sort of elements that I would take from either to sort of get like an ideal course, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the experience and the skills that I've gained from my first degree and try and apply them as best I can into this degree. There are certain areas that I'm just having to learn and adapt to that are brand new to me, and the asynchronous content is very much one of them, where I'm getting the hang of it now, but I very much struggled with it at first, and the rote learning and trying to come up with methods to just sort of understand that knowledge. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I've touched on a couple of other videos that I'm going to do. I want to do sort of a wrap up of what module 1 was like and how I found that experience, and I also kind of want to go through PBL and the general structure of the course, because PBL tends to form a bit of the backbone of the course. But if you have any ideas of videos or anything that you want to see, just drop it in the comments down below and hopefully I'll get on it. So thank you for sitting with me, and I'll see you in the next one.